In the freezing winter of Manhattan, a surprising story unfolded, a story that few could imagine. Picture Donald Trump, instead of sitting in his usual warm limousine, deciding to walk through the crowded streets where the cold wind cuts through every layer of clothing. But in that biting cold, a fateful encounter took place in a small alley, forever changing the life of a homeless Marine veteran. Jack Miller, in his worn-out military jacket and tired eyes, thought his life held no more hope. But he didn't know that in just a few moments an unexpected offer would pull him out of the darkness and bring light back to a life that seemed to have faded away. This journey is not just a story of kindness, but also a testament to the power of empathy, courage, and the desire for change. A life that seemed hopeless suddenly became a symbol of hope and rebirth. Join us as we explore this emotional story. From the cold alley to the glorious stage at the White House, this is not just the journey of one man, but also a profound lesson in compassion and social responsibility. Don't look away, because what's coming next will not only move you, but also make you reflect on the power of seemingly small actions. The winter wind cut through the streets of Manhattan, so cold that it numbed fingers even when buried deep in pockets. Pedestrians hunched their shoulders and quickened their steps to escape the harsh cold. In that bustling scene, Donald Trump, wearing a black overcoat and accompanied by 5 bodyguards, walked along the sidewalk. Instead of sitting in his familiar limousine, he wanted to feel the real pulse of the city, something he rarely did. Despite the freezing temperature, Manhattan was still full of life, but deep within it lay forgotten lives. No one expected that on this impromptu walk a fateful encounter would occur. As he turned into a small alley, Trump suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on a man sitting against a cold stone wall. The man wore a faded military jacket with worn seams that told stories of time and hardship. His legs were crossed, his rough hands clutching a cardboard sign with scrawled words, "Veteran needs help." Trump approached. His security team quickly raised their hands to stop him, but he signaled them to stand down. The sound of his shoes on the salt-strewn pavement made small noises in the quiet cold. The man looked up, his tired eyes full of wariness. "Who's there?" the man asked hoarsely, his eyes sharp as knives. Trump bent down, his gaze steady but warm, and extended his hand. "I'm Donald Trump," he said evenly and deeply. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, staring at the outstretched hand as if it were a trap. But after a few seconds of doubt, he took Trump's hand and stood up. His legs trembled from the cold and years of hardship. "Jack Miller," he said hoarsely but clearly, "former Marine." Trump raised his eyebrows slightly, his voice gentle but interested. "Where did you serve, Jack?" Jack looked at him, a flicker of pride in his eyes before it faded into sorrow. "Afghanistan, Bravo Company. We were called the Ghost Team, but everything fell apart when we came back." Trump recognized the name Bravo Company immediately. He had heard of this unit, soldiers who had undertaken missions others thought impossible. Surprise flashed in his eyes. "You were one of those who did the impossible." Jack gave a dry laugh. "Yes, we did those things, but when we came back, the country we protected no longer protected us." Those words made Trump pause. He looked at the man before him, thin, tired, but with a spark of pride in his eyes. He thought about the contrast between what Jack had sacrificed and the reality he now faced. "How long have you been here?" Trump asked softly but firmly. Jack looked up, his eyes full of bitter irony. "Too long to remember. Each day is just another battle. No glory, just survival." Trump stood still, his eyes locked on Jack's. He felt a strong urge, not just to help Jack escape the cold of that day, but to help him find meaning in life again. "Come with me, Jack. You don't belong here." Jack hesitated. His pride made him want to refuse, but Trump's sincere gaze made him unable to turn away. Finally, he nodded slightly. "All right," he murmured, "but don't promise if you don't intend to keep it." Trump didn't answer, just nodded slightly, a silent but determined gesture. This encounter would not only change Jack's life, but also begin an emotional and meaningful journey that neither of them could have anticipated. Jack stood silently in the alley, his eyes full of fatigue and doubt. Trump's invitation was like a light piercing through the cold night. "Come with me, Jack. You don't belong here, Trump said firmly but steadily. Jack shook his head, a flash of resistance in his eyes. I don't need pity, he said hoarsely but with dignity. I've survived this long. I can take care of myself. Trump stood still, his gaze unwavering. This isn't pity, this is what you deserve, Trump replied, emphasizing each word. He took a step toward Jack, his voice softening but still strong. You fought for us, now let me fight for you. Those words made Jack pause. He took a deep breath, feeling his defenses crumbling. After a few moments of silence, Jack nodded, his eyes not leaving Trump's. All right, he muttered, but don't promise anything you won't keep. Trump smiled slightly, saying nothing more, just signaling his security team to follow them. The car took both of them to a small but cozy hotel nearby. As they entered the warm lobby, Jack shivered slightly, not from cold but from the unfamiliar feeling. It had been a long time since he had been in such a place. Trump quickly handled the check-in process, handed Jack the keycard, and looked at him seriously. Rest, we'll talk tomorrow. The next morning, soft light from the window woke Jack from the deepest sleep he had had in years. A breakfast tray was neatly placed beside him, the smell of toasted bread and coffee filling the room. Jack sat down, his hands trembling as he held the hot coffee cup, feeling the warmth spread through him. A few hours later, Trump arrived and sat opposite Jack in the small room. I want to know more about you, Jack, Trump began. Not just what you've been through, but about Bravo Company. Jack put down his coffee cup, his gaze distant. Bravo Company, he repeated softly. We were a strong team. We undertook missions no one thought possible. But war took not only my comrades, but also a part of me. Jack nodded, waiting for Trump to continue. After we came back, nothing was the same, Jack said, his voice breaking. I lost my job, my family. Every night, I see their faces, the ones I couldn't protect. Trump sat in silence, his eyes full of empathy. You've sacrificed a lot, Jack, not just for this country, but for the people you love. But it's time you got back what you deserve. Jack gave a faint smile. Deserve? I don't think so. We were just doing our job, nothing more. Trump leaned forward, his gaze serious. You did more than your job, and now I want the world to know that. Jack was silent. His eyes held a glimmer of hope. What do you plan to do? He asked softly. Trump stood up and looked directly at Jack. I'm not just going to help you. I'm going to honor Bravo Company. Soldiers like you deserve recognition, not to live in the shadows. And I'll make sure that happens. Jack watched Trump leave. His heart felt a spark of something that had long been extinguished. Faith. Though still doubtful, Trump's sincerity was undeniable. For the first time in years, Jack felt he was not alone. After the emotional conversation at the hotel, Trump decided to act immediately. He assembled his team and gave them an important mission: to find the remaining members of Bravo Company, the Marine unit that had served together. Trump believed that to change Jack's life, recognizing the entire team was essential. In the office, Trump's assistants worked tirelessly. They reviewed all records, contacted veteran organizations, and tracked down leads through scarce information. Each confirmed name was a step closer to their goal. But the initial results surprised everyone. Many from Bravo Company were living in conditions no better than Jack's. Some had lost their homes. Some struggled with mental trauma. Others didn't even want to mention their past. When Trump informed Jack of the progress, he hoped Jack would be excited. But instead, Jack fell silent, his eyes full of worry. I'm not sure they'll want to see me again. Jack sighed. War didn't just take our youth. It left wounds I don't think anyone wants to reopen. Jack, Trump said deeply and powerfully, if we do nothing, they'll remain forgotten. You're not just doing this for yourself, but for all your comrades. Jack nodded. Though still hesitant, he knew reconnecting with his comrades was not just a difficult task, but also a confrontation with emotions he had tried to bury. In the following days, Jack and Trump's team began their search journey. They drove through many states, knocked on doors, and made countless calls. Each meeting brought different emotions. Some cried when they saw Jack. Some looked at him with cold eyes, and some even refused to open their doors. One afternoon, they visited Paul's house, once the best sharpshooter in the team. As Jack entered the yard full of weeds and trash, Paul appeared with lifeless eyes. "Jack?" Paul asked hoarsely. "You're still alive?" Jack smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension. "Yes, I'm here. I came to find you. We want to hold a ceremony to honor Bravo Company." Paul scoffed, his eyes full of sarcasm. "Honor? After everything we've been through, who cares? Who remembers us, Jack?" Jack stepped closer and placed his hand on Paul's shoulder. "If we don't speak up, who will? Paul, we deserve recognition, not for fame, but to remind the world that our sacrifices were not in vain." Paul was silent, his eyes teary, but with a hint of hope. "Let me think," he said before turning back inside. Though difficult, the journey continued. One morning, as Jack sat in the hotel with his team, a letter was delivered to him. Jack opened it with trembling hands. Inside was the messy handwriting of a comrade named Mike, whom Jack thought would never contact him again. "Hey, Jack, I heard about the honor ceremony. I'm not sure I deserve it, but if you're there, I'll come. We've been through a lot together, and I think it's time we remind the world about Bravo Company." Mike. Jack finished reading, feeling warmth spread through his heart. He clutched the letter tightly, looking at it with determination. "We can do this," he said firmly. "They'll come." Trump smiled, a mix of satisfaction and emotion. "I never doubted that, Jack." The search for Bravo Company was not just about reconnecting with the past, but also about lighting small sparks of hope. Jack realized that no matter how deep the mental wounds, the power of camaraderie and faith could heal them all. The morning light shone brightly through the trees in the White House grounds. The atmosphere was filled with solemnity and expectation. Jack Miller, in a simple but neat suit, walked through the gates leading to the historic building. He walked slowly, his eyes full of wonder as he saw the place that had only appeared on TV now right before him. Around Jack were his comrades from Bravo Company. Each carried their own memories, pains, and pride. Some smiled when they saw each other. The tight handshakes were full of emotion, making all barriers of time seem to disappear. When the large doors of the White House opened, Jack and his comrades were welcomed with thunderous applause. The officials and guests present stood up, showing their deepest respect. The sound of applause seemed to melt the icy layers in Jack's heart, layers that had formed after years of feeling forgotten. A comrade, Mike, gently patted Jack's shoulder and whispered, "Jack, look, who would have thought we'd be here, welcomed as real heroes?" Jack turned to him, his eyes teary, but smiling. "I didn't think so either, Mike, but we deserve it." In the main room, a small stage was set up with the American flag waving above it. President Trump stepped onto the podium, his eyes scanning the room and resting on the soldiers of Bravo Company with deep respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trump began, his voice echoing but full of emotion. "Today we gather to honor those who have dedicated their lives to protecting our country. The soldiers of Bravo Company are not only heroes on the battlefield, but also symbols of resilience and loyalty." He paused for a moment, his gaze on Jack and his comrades. "These men fought for us. Now it's time we fight to protect their honor." The entire room fell silent. Only the steady breathing of the soldiers could be heard. Their eyes shone with pride, but also with emotion. Jack felt the weight of that moment, as if all the hardships he and his comrades had faced were now soothed by those sincere words. Trump stepped down from the podium, holding a small velvet box containing a medal. He walked towards Jack and stopped in front of the soldier who had once thought he was forgotten forever. "Jack Miller," Trump said deeply and firmly, "for your courage and immeasurable contributions, we award you this Medal of Honor. You are not just a soldier, you are a hero." Jack stood there, speechless as Trump placed the medal around his neck. Tears streamed down his weathered face. The applause rang out again, louder and longer than before. Mike stood next to Jack, gripping his hand tightly. Looking at him with emotion-filled eyes, Mike softly said, "This is the first time I feel we are not forgotten." Jack didn't reply, just nodded silently. His heart felt like it might burst, not from personal pride, but from the feeling of being recognized, a feeling he and his comrades had longed for many years. The ceremony continued with endless applause, emotional speeches from officials, and tight hugs between soldiers who had once fought side by side. But for Jack, The moment of receiving the medal was not just the highlight of the ceremony, but also the beginning of a new journey, a journey to not only revive faith in himself, but also to inspire other soldiers like him across America. The honor ceremony at the White House ended with applause and tearful emotions. But for Donald Trump, this was not the end, but the beginning of a greater journey. The next day, in a press conference, Trump officially announced the establishment of the Bravo Company Fund, a non-profit organization to support veterans like Jack and his comrades. This fund is not just a tribute to Bravo Company. Standing before the press, Trump declared, "This is our commitment that no veteran is left behind. From housing and mental health care to employment, we will ensure they get the second chance they deserve." Jack stood in the corner of the room, watching the crowd applaud the plan. Though grateful, he still felt out of place in this formal setting. When Trump approached him after the speech, Jack's eyes were sad. "Jack," Trump said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "I want you to lead this fund. No one is more suitable than you to understand and help people like you." Jack shook his head immediately, his eyes showing refusal. "I can't, sir. I'm just a former soldier, failed and lost. I don't know how to lead such a large organization." Trump looked directly at Jack, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to be perfect, Jack. You just need to lead with your heart. You've done that with your comrades, and I know you can do that with others." Those words touched Jack, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unworthiness. "Give me time," he whispered. Time passed, and Jack began his new role, but the weight of the past didn't leave him. Sleepless nights became routine. Nightmares of war haunted him, waking him up in the middle of the night covered in cold sweat. Images of fallen comrades, sounds of gunfire, and feelings of helplessness replayed in his mind. One morning, in the office of the Bravo Company Fund, Jack sat alone at his desk. His hands trembled as he looked at the pile of documents to process. He felt the pressure weighing on him, feeling unable to bear the responsibility. In a moment of weakness, Jack decided to attend a psychological counseling session that Trump had arranged for him. In the counseling room, Jack sat opposite the doctor, his eyes full of fatigue. "I don't know if I can do this," Jack admitted, his voice choked. "I'm not strong enough. I'm not the person they need." The doctor sat in silence for a moment, then gently said, "You don't have to do this alone, Jack. Let others support you. Your team, your comrades, they're all here for you. Trust them as they trust you." Those words were like a small light piercing through the darkness in Jack's mind. For the first time, he realized he didn't have to carry everything alone. A week later, Jack received an invitation to speak at a large event for veterans. Initially, he refused, afraid he wouldn't have the courage to stand before hundreds of people and share his story. But encouragement from the fund's team and his old comrades changed his mind. On the day of the event, Jack stood backstage. His hands clutched his notes tightly, his heart pounding, sweat beating on his forehead. Michael, his old comrade, approached and patted him lightly on the shoulder. "You can do this, Jack," Mike said with a touch of humor. "You've faced bullets before. A crowd is nothing." Jack smiled faintly and took a deep breath. Those encouraging words helped Jack regain some calm. When introduced onto the stage, he walked slowly forward. The bright lights made him feel exposed to every gaze. Jack took a deep breath and let his eyes sweep over the crowded audience. He began to speak, his voice hoarse and trembling, but each word carried all the pent-up emotions he had held back for so long. "I'm not a hero," Jack said. "I'm just a soldier like everyone else in this room. We've done unimaginable things, and we've lost a lot. But I stand here today to say that we are not alone. We can overcome anything as long as we have each other." The room fell silent. Only the sound of steady breathing could be heard. Some bowed their heads, some quickly wiped away tears. When Jack finished his speech, applause thundered throughout the hall. He looked at the audience, feeling like he had overcome a great wall in his heart. That was the moment Jack realized that no matter how heavy the past, he could move forward, not just for himself, but for those who were counting on him. The gala night of the Bravo Company Fund was held in a large hall decorated with bright golden lights and banners bearing messages of gratitude to veterans. Outside, numerous reporters and guests bustled through the red carpet. But inside, The atmosphere was completely different, warm, intimate, and full of emotion. Jack stood backstage for the second time in his life, preparing to step onto a large stage. Though he had spoken in public before, this time held a special meaning. He was speaking not just for himself, but for all his comrades in Bravo Company, those who had sacrificed their youth and lives for their country. Trump entered the waiting room and patted Jack on the shoulder with an encouraging smile. "You've done this once before, Jack, and I know you'll do even better than you think. Just speak from your heart." Jack took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anxiety creeping into his heart. "I don't want to disappoint anyone, sir," he said hoarsely. Trump smiled gently, his eyes full of encouragement. "You don't need to worry about making an impression, Jack. Just be yourself. That's why everyone is here tonight." When the host introduced his name, Jack walked onto the stage amid endless applause. The entire hall stood up, their applause echoing as if to express their deepest respect for the old soldier. Jack stood in the spotlight, his eyes sweeping over the crowded audience. A surprising sense of peace enveloped him. After a moment of silence, he began to speak. "We are Bravo Company," Jack said deeply but resoundingly. "We fought in the most brutal battlefields, where every day was a struggle to survive. We did things no one wanted to do because it was our duty. But when we came back, I thought we would be welcomed as heroes. Instead, we were forgotten." The entire hall fell silent as if drawn into Jack's story. He told of the days on the battlefield, of fallen comrades, and of the helplessness of not being able to save everyone. "We didn't just lose friends, we lost a part of ourselves," Jack said, his voice breaking. There were sniffles from a corner of the room, and some people secretly wiped away tears. Jack paused for a moment before continuing with stronger eyes. "But tonight, as I stand here, I realize that we are not forgotten. None of us are forgotten." Jack told of his journey out of darkness, of the help from Trump and the Bravo Company Fund. He said that though the wounds in their souls might never fully heal, with comrades and organizations like Bravo Company, they were no longer alone in their battles. Applause once again thundered throughout the hall, but this time it was not just for Jack. It was for all the soldiers who had fought, sacrificed, and were never forgotten. The recognition and love from the community helped him and his comrades find meaning in life again. When Jack finished his speech, the hall was silent for a few seconds before erupting in prolonged applause. Many stood up, unable to contain their emotions at Jack's sincere and powerful story. Trump stepped onto the stage, shook Jack's hand, and looked at the audience with determination. "Jack is right. None of us are forgotten, and I promise that will never change." He continued to announce an additional large donation to the Bravo Company Fund, with the goal of expanding support for more veterans. "This fund is not just a tribute, it's a promise that every veteran will have the chance to rebuild their lives with our help." The entire hall once again burst into applause, not just for Jack, but for a hopeful future they were building together. Jack stood still, looking at the radiant faces around him, feeling a long-forgotten sensation, pride and peace. On a quiet evening, Jack sat alone in a small room. The dim light cast shadows on his face. On the table was an old photo of Bravo Company, young faces strong and full of passion. Jack picked up the photo and let his eyes rest on each person, those who had shared the most brutal days with him. He remembered everything, from the cold alley in Manhattan where he met Trump to the emotional reunions with comrades and other veterans. Every step of this journey was a lesson in resilience, empathy, and the power of human connection. Jack smiled faintly as he thought about the Bravo Company Fund, now a symbol of hope and change, not only helping veterans find themselves again, but also creating a bonded community where everyone could find empathy and mutual support. At a year-end ceremony at the White House, Trump stepped onto the podium. His eyes rested on Jack, sitting in the front row. "Jack's journey is not just his own story," Trump said deeply but powerfully. "It's a story about the strength of people when they decide not to give up. A small action can create big changes, and what we do today will create a better future." The hall echoed with applause. Jack felt warmth in his heart. Those words were not just recognition, but also a reminder that he was not alone in this journey. Jack stood up and walked onto the stage. He looked at the audience with determination. "I'm not a hero," he said tremblingly but emotionally. "I'm just a soldier who once thought he had lost everything. But thanks to help and empathy from people like you, I've found my purpose again." He paused and looked around the hall. "The most important thing I've learned is that we can't overcome every difficulty alone. But when we are together and willing to help each other, we can achieve extraordinary things." Jack's story quickly spread and became motivation for many people. Community organizations across the country began launching similar support programs, continuing the legacy of the Bravo Company Fund. In the following years, Jack continued to work tirelessly to ensure that every veteran had the chance to find light in their lives again. His story is not only a reminder of gratitude, but also a lesson on the power of mutual support. Before ending, I want to say, sometimes even a small action or a kind gesture can change someone's life.